Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of May of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And summarizing everything that took place during the previous 24 hours, we can say that the situation is very difficult. We haven't seen such a crazy picture as we could see today probably since the summer of 2024, when the Russians were showing us probably craziest updates, craziest result after the fall of the city of Avdiivka, when the Russians were moving further in the western direction, taking one settlement after another. Currently we can see something like this. So let's start from the beginning. But before we start, another important thing. Today we will discuss lots of maneuvers, lots of operations carried out both by the Russians and by the Ukrainians. But one thing we need to understand at the beginning. The Russians, before the beginning of this crazy day, before the beginning of the 5th of May of 2025, knew everything. The Russians knew exactly how the Ukrainians were planning to attack the Russians. The Russians knew exactly what kind of roads to attacks the Ukrainians were planning to use. The Russians knew 400%, and they were 400% sure what kind of probably brigades, units the Ukrainians were planning to involve in the upcoming events that took place today. The Russians, probably 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours before the Ukrainians started their another adventure in Kursk region, began bombing and attacking the entire territory of Ukraine with drones, with missiles, and with bombs. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were destroying the temporary deployment points in Donbass direction, in the Sumy direction. As a result of all these strikes, the Russians destroyed a lot of ammo depots, warehouses, and the most important temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, we have several videos from the Liman direction. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of another strike, destroyed another ammo depot or warehouse of the armed forces of Ukraine that were planning to use properly to support their forces in the Liman direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians destroyed the temporary deployment point of the 116th Mechanized Brigade that Ukrainians bring in this direction with the purpose to slow down and to stop the Russians. In this episode, the Russians destroyed the temporary deployment point of the 114th Brigade, and in this video of 66th Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. And all these brigades are located in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to break through Ukrainian positions and defense in the direction of the settlement by the name of Barova and in the direction of the settlement by the name of Liman. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Donbass direction. For example, in this video that was published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we can see how the Russians discovered temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine in the city of Konstantinovka. And as a result of Geraint strikes, the Russians managed to destroy these temporary deployment points, which obviously affected the situation on the ground in the Kliban-Byksky direction or in the Toretsk direction, where the Ukrainians suffer huge losses and where the Ukrainians still haven't managed to stabilize the situation. In the southwestern direction, the Russians managed to discover positions of 112th Brigade of the Territory Defense. Lots of vehicles, lots of equipments were abandoned by the Ukrainians without any protection. The Russians probably managed to discover these positions a long time ago, but the Russians didn't attack these positions a week ago because the Russians knew that they need to attack this area right before the beginning of another Russian major offensive operation, which is currently taking place and which was started today. As a result of this attack, as you can see, the Ukrainians suffered huge losses. Lots of vehicles and equipment were destroyed. A bit further in the western direction, the Russians managed to discover temporary deployment point and the warehouse of the 142nd Mechanized Brigade. As a result of multiple drone strikes, this warehouse was completely destroyed. Ukrainians were planning to use this this warehouse to stabilize the situation in the vicinity of the city by the name of Pokrovsk, but most likely now they will not be able to do this. Obviously, the Ukrainians have hundreds of warehouses, but obviously this one the Ukrainians are no longer able to use. As for the Dnipro and Kherson direction, another important video was published by the Russians. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing positions of the Russian Federation on the territory of Kherson with HIMARS missiles. This is the first HIMARS launch and this is the second HIMARS launch. The Russians managed to discover the temporary deployment points and places where the Ukrainians were planning to hide these HIMARS from the Russians. And as soon as the Russians discovered these, let's say, shelter, the Russians attacked this territory with FAB or with missile. Most likely the Ukrainians lost 2 more HIMARS systems. So as you can see, and once again, the Russians published all these videos today for a reason. The Russians made all these strikes just with one purpose: to defeat and to destroy Ukrainian logistic and their lines and their probably everything they have and everything they could use before the beginning of the Russian major offensive. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the course direction where the Ukrainians today began their another adventure. You know that during the previous 24 hours, lots of Russian resources published lots of information about the situation on the ground. The Russians reported that the Ukrainians began another offensive operation with the purpose to take under control the settlement of Tyotkina, and this is probably the target and the task of the armored forces of Ukraine before the 9th of May, to show Putin and to show Russians that they still control the situation. We got a lot of updates, and the most important, we have lots of geolocations. But before we start, I would like to point your attention that today the Ukrainians didn't start their offensive operation. Everything that we saw today was just the demining and clearing process. The Ukrainians were focused just on one thing. The Ukrainians were trying to breach Russian defenses, to breach Russian minefields, and to prepare roads that Ukrainians could use for further offensives that most likely are going to take place during the upcoming night between the 5th and the 6th of May, and most likely during the 6th and the 7th of May, maybe 8th and 9th of May of 2025. In this video, we can see how Ukrainian engineering equipment managed to breach the lines of Dragon Teeth. In this video, for example, we can see how the Ukrainians were breaching the minefields that the most likely Ukrainians will use in the very near future. In this video, we can see how Ukrainian engineering equipment was moving towards the border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. But most likely this engineering equipment was damaged and destroyed by the Russian FPV drone attacks. In this video we can see exactly the moment when Ukrainian engineering equipment was heading towards the border but was damaged and destroyed. In this video we can see another Ukrainian engineering equipment that was heading towards the border but was stopped and attacked and destroyed by the Russian FPV drones. So once again, as a result of the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians managed to do just one thing, basically 3 things. They managed to create 3 roads of attack. And as a result of this, they lost lots of engineering equipment. So what kind of roads of attacks the Ukrainians managed to create? The first one, according to geolocation, the first roads of attack lays between the settlement of Pavlovka and the settlement of Novoput, which means that most likely during the upcoming night, the Ukrainians will begin offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over this settlement. The next attack road the Ukrainians created between the settlement of Solyanki and the settlement of Besalovka, most likely with the purpose to attack further during the upcoming night in the direction of the settlement by the name of Zarya. The third route of attack Ukrainians created on the way towards the settlement of Tyotkina. So now we see what exactly the Ukrainians are able to do. Ukrainians will not attack during the upcoming night, let's say, using these routes of attack, because this will lead to significant losses, because the Russians have minefields and dragon teeth in this direction. The Ukrainians will attack only on those directions that they managed to clear. So which means that probably during the upcoming night between the 5th, 6th of May and during the 6th of May, the Ukrainians will try to establish complete control over the settlement of Novoput, most likely the Ukrainians will try to answer the village of Obukhova, and most likely the Ukrainians will try to get as close as possible to Krasnooktябрьsky. So this is the task and the target for Ukrainian stormtroopers in this direction. As for these two lines of attacks, most likely the Ukrainians will try to establish complete control over the settlement of Zarya. If the Ukrainians are able to do this, then the Ukrainians will be able to cut one of the supply lines that goes in the direction of the settlement by the name of Tyotkina. Furthermore, and most likely the Ukrainians are planning to attack the settlement of Tyotkina from the east using these roads of attack, and this is most likely the Ukrainian target for the next 24 and 48 hours. We're not saying that the Ukrainians are able to do this, but we are making our conclusions, and our conclusions are about what the Ukrainians are planning to do during the next 24, 48 hours based on the roads of attacks and areas of demining that they managed to create during the previous 24 hours. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the things and attacks that we saw today were just the beginning. As for the original Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything. The Russians most likely were focused on redeploying of their units, troops, FPV drone operators from this area in the direction of the settlement by the name of Tyotkina, with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to prepare themselves before heavy clashes that are going to take place during the upcoming night and upcoming day of the 6th of May of 2025. As for the Belgorod direction, according to information we have, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, according to Deep State, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions and to take additional fields and forests between the border and the settlement of Demidovka. The Ukrainians were forced to abandon their probably very important positions, and now the Ukrainians control just the area along the border, and probably the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area as well. As for the Kupiansk direction, when talking about the northern part, we haven't received anything during the previous 24 hours. As for the southern direction, we have discussed most of the updates. Once again, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians destroyed lots of ammo depots and warehouses in the vicinity of the city by the name of Izium. The Russians attacked positions of the armored forces of Ukraine of 116th, 66th and 114th brigades in this direction. So the strikes are very heavy, as you can see, and now we can see the line of how the Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions. Once most likely the Russians are preparing themselves before the beginning of another offensive operation in the direction of Barova and in the direction of the city by the name of Liman. Now let's move further. As for the Sivas direction, before I started making this video, we got another important update that the Russians managed to improve their positions, and the Russians, telling the truth, improved their positions significantly. We need additional time to get additional geolocations to adjust the map, so this situation in the Sivas direction we will discuss during the next video. But once again, a small spoiler, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. Now let's talk about the Konstantinovka direction. Once again, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians basically reduced to ruins a lot of temporary deployment points of the armored forces of Ukraine, different military and industrial facilities that Ukrainians used for arms supply and arms production. This strike took place in the area of Bila Kozminovka, lots of Gerain strikes in the city of Kramatorsk, lots of explosions, lots of attacks with missiles that use cluster warheads. So obviously all these attacks were done for a reason. As for the Chasiv Yar direction, almost every single day we get more and more updates, more and more geolocations exactly, let's say, from this area, which means that the Russians most likely are planning to move and turn their direction of offensive in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Slaviansk. So most likely after the fall of the city of Chasiv Yar, the Russians are not going to continue offensive operation in the direction of Konstantinovka. Most likely the Russians will attack in the northwestern directions towards the city of Kramatorsk and the city of Slaviansk. If the Russians are able to take this pocket under complete control, then the Russians will be able to establish complete fire control over the road N20. As for the Deter area, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the settlement Delivka and the railway station. We have, let's say, report an article that was published by neutral resources, and we have video that confirms Russian control over the tree lines in the vicinity of the railway station. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were bombing Russian edge positions in this direction. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. And now we see that during this period of time, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the Lyivka from the south and from the southwest, and from the east and the northeast. Now we see that the Russians, as a result of maneuvers they have carried out since the beginning of April, managed to take these positions and this dense network of fortifications of the armored forces of Ukraine in pincers. And we expect and we believe that Ukrainians are no longer able to hold this area under complete control. Most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Alexander Shultina, and this is going to happen in the very near future. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the area between the villages of Novospassky and Sherbinovka. And according to this configuration, according to all these geolocations, we see that the Russians managed to take both settlements in pincers as well. The Russians improved their positions from the south, and the Russians during the previous days managed to improve their positions from the north and to reach the railways and the river of Krivotorets from the north, and all these two maneuvers that the Russians have carried out since the beginning of April managed them to encircle Ukrainians from the south and from the north. Basically, this small agglomeration was taken pincers by the Russians. As for now, we have lots of icons, lots of videos from the village of Novospassky. The Russians currently establish complete control with drones over this territory. Lots of attacks. This village was almost reduced to ruins by the Russians, and most likely in the very near future the Russians will resume their ground operation with the purpose to break through Ukrainian lines and to get as close as possible to the settlement, to the river of Krivotorets from the south. Let's say the Russians currently are planning to take under control everything that is located along this red line. Now let's move further. As for the Kliban-Byksky direction, as you can see, we have probably anomaly number of icons and geolocations. First of all, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the northwest of the settlement of Sukhaya Balka. This information was provided by neutral mappers. We see that currently the distance between possible Russian edge positions in this area and Ukrainian positions on the territory of the settlement of Romanovka is already less than 2 kilometers, which is obviously nothing for the Russians. As for the western flank, we have lots of icons. There are very clashes currently for the settlement of Alexandropol. According to several pro-Russian resources, the village of Alexandropol is already under complete Russian control. We believe that there are some sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armored force of the Russian Federation. At the same time, there are still units of the armored force of Ukraine. But the thing is that during the previous 48-72 hours, the Russians established complete FPV drone and superiority. The Russians established complete control over the sky by above the settlement of Alexandropol. In this video, we can see how the Russians were attacking and destroying Ukrainian drones of Baba Yaga type, which means that the Ukrainians are no longer able to control this territory from the sky. The Russians established complete control, and this control led to the situation that Ukrainians are no longer able to use regular roads and vehicles to supply and support their contingent on the territory of this settlement, which most likely in the very near future will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense. We expect that the settlement of Alexandropol would be taken by the Russians during the next 48-72 hours, and the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this. Furthermore, this progress can happen much earlier. Ukrainians realized that they are no longer able to hold their positions in this pocket, so that is why the Ukrainians from the southern part decided to fall back towards the settlement of Gnatovka, and the Russians established control over positions that were abandoned by the Ukrainians without any resistance, without almost any resistance. During the previous 24 hours, we got several geolocations and videos from this part of the front line, where we can see how Ukrainians were trying to slow down the Russians with FPV drones, but it didn't help them. Now let's talk about the most powerful stronghold, which is already almost semi-encircled by the Russians. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of geolocations from the southern part of the settlement of Nova Poltavka. According to information we have, the Russians answered this village yesterday or even the day before yesterday. But as for yesterday's and the day before yesterday, we didn't have any geolocations that could confirm this. But today we got two geolocations. For example, in this video we can see how Russian infantry fighting vehicle entered the most southern part and was attacking Ukrainian positions, trying to cover Russian units that were landing in this area at the same time. So in this video we could see how Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions from this point, and while the Russian infantry landed along these buildings. Later we got several more geolocations in the southern part of the settlement where we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this region. Based on this video we have adjusted the map, but we believe that all these two videos are already archived. Most likely events that took place in this video probably happened 2 or 3 days ago. Most likely the Russians currently control up to 50% of the settlement. Most likely the Russians are about to establish complete control over this territory. If the Russians are able to do this, then Ukrainians that are currently located in the central part in this stronghold will lose every single road that Ukrainians still have possibilities to use to supply their forces there. If Ukrainians lose this stronghold, this is going to be something like another collapse of one of the most important and strategical defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the northeastern direction from the settlement of Kotlina. During the previous 24 hours, this information was confirmed both by neutral mappers and by pro-Russian resources, as for now without any proofs and any geolocations. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the eastern part of the settlement of Udachne. Another spoiler, this is another area. We got another geolocation that confirm additional progress on the ground by the Russian forces. But this geolocation, this video was published probably 5 seconds before I started making this video, so it's just a spoiler. Tomorrow we will discuss this in details. Once again, most likely we will adjust significant part of Udachna in Russian favor. The Russians during the previous 24 hours attacked Ukrainian mines to the north of the settlement, trying to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to redeploy additional troops to introduce additional reinforcements on the area of Udachna with the purpose to stabilize the situation. As for the Dnipro direction, we have lots of icons, as you can see, and probably the most important icon is coming from the area of the settlement of Kotlerovka. Pro-Ukrainian sources Deep State adjusted their map this way. They shown us that the Russians established complete control over 3 lines that go around and along the settlement of Kotlerovka and further in the western direction. So this is the situation by the end of the 4th of May, and this is the situation by the end of the 5th of May. As you can see, according to pro-Ukrainian sources and according to pro-Russian resources, the settlement of Kotlerovka was almost captured by the Russians, secured, and most likely, according to pro-Ukrainians, as you can see, this area is covered with the fog of war, which means that tomorrow the Russians will finish their offensive operation here. And if this information is correct, now we see that the distance between possible Russian edge positions in the vicinity of the river by the name of Serebryanka and the border between two regions is already less than 2.7 kilometers. But the most important, that there are no more strongholds, no more tree lines, there are several tree lines, no more barriers, more precisely, in front of the armored force of the Russian Federation to move in the direction of the border. And most likely we're going to see this. As for now, the Russians don't even need to take these territories under complete control. The only thing the Russians need is another breakthrough with motorcycles, maybe even with drones, to establish Russian flag on the territory of Dnipro region, let's say in this point, and then to fall back, to hold their positions here for another day or for another hour or for several hours, and then to fall back. And this could be significant media victory for the Russians during the 9th of May. And we believe that this is exactly what the Russians are going to do. Now let's move further. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue making attempts to take under control the central and to improve their positions in the southeastern part of the settlement of Bogatyr. But we see that Ukrainians still hold their positions. The Ukrainians have strong control over this territory, despite Russian attempts to probably destroy and to attack this territory with a significant number of bombs, drones, and everything they have. As for now, Ukrainians control the territory. At the same time, according to geolocations and different articles, the Russians continue improving their positions on the lines between the settlements of Razdolne Atradne and Razdolne Bogatyr. These are the changes on the ground. As you can see, we have adjusted significant territories in Russian favor, based on geolocation that was provided by the Ukrainian side. We will not open this video because there are a lot of violence. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of Zelene Pole. This is another area where the Russians managed to achieve significant results. According to information we have, according to several geolocations that were published by the 31st Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and according to pro-Ukrainian sources Deep State, the Russians managed to break through to bridge Ukrainian lines and to answer the southeastern part of the settlement of Novopol. We came to this based on the article and based on the adjustments that were made by pro-Ukrainian sources. So once again, as a result of offensive, the Russians answered the southeastern part of the settlement of Novopol. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 4th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 5th of May. The Russians are heading towards the settlement of Zelene Pole and Novopol, and most likely very heavy clashes are going to start for these two villages in the very near future. As for the Zaporozhye direction, we haven't received anything. As for the Kherson direction, another spoiler that we're going to talk during the next video. Right before we started making this video, we got several reports that indeed the Russians managed to cross the river of Dnipro, and not just to cross, but to establish a strong control over some territories. As for now, we don't have enough of proofs, but we will discuss this during the next update. Something big is brewing in the Kherson direction as well. As you can see, the situation is critical. Lots of crazy updates, and telling the truth, I can't even tell you how exactly all these things are going to happen and are going to finish. And that's it for today. Military Samurai channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.